Most folks dream of expanding their ranch, adding a few acres here, a pasture there. I just never imagined I'd do it by acquiring the very homeowners association that tried to kick me off my own land. Sounds absurd, right? Like something torn from the pages of a fever dream. But buckle up, because what follows is the true story of how a power-hungry HOA president and her obedient little board pushed a quiet, peace-loving rancher a few steps too far. Let me know where you're watching from tonight, because this tale, this saga of slow-burning suburban warfare, is one for the archives. It involves spreadsheets, sleepless nights, county clerk records, and a final act that turned the tables so hard it left heads spinning. I'm talking about the barn, my family's ranch. It's been in our blood for 3 generations, long before the preening rooftops of Whispering Pines estates scarred the old countryside. My grandfather built the place with grit and bare hands. My father grew it with sweat and savvy. I inherited more than land, I inherited a legacy. Seasons marked by planting and harvest, mornings full of frost and promise. The barn isn't property. It's my identity. I'm an agricultural engineer by trade. Spent a decade designing sustainable farming systems before coming home to run the ranch full-time. I know land. I understand systems, infrastructure, and boundaries. Both the kind you draw on a survey map and the kind you don't cross if you value your teeth. The trouble started small. It always does. Whispering Pines had sprouted 5 years earlier, a mess of beige boxes and manicured driveways built right up against my eastern fence line. I kept to myself. I'd nod to someone walking their poodle. They'd wrinkle their noses at the scent of honest manure. Still, it was live and let live. That ended the day Brenda Culper took over as HOA president. She drove a showroom-clean white SUV that looked allergic to dirt and wore pantsuits so loud they practically screamed. Her hair never moved, and neither did her expression. The first time I heard from her, it was through a certified letter, absurdly formal, borderline theatrical. It claimed one of my live oaks, a gnarled beauty planted long before Brenda was born, was obstructing the view for some of their residents. They wanted it removed. I laughed, replied politely, explained it was on my side of the line and that tree had more right to be there than their whole development. I thought that was that. I was wrong. That letter was just the beginning. Next came formal complaints about odors. Then came an accusation that my century-old barbed wire fence was aesthetic pollution and should be replaced with a white vinyl picket fence, at my own cost, of course. Every message was more aggressive than the last. They cited HOA bylaws with no bearing on my land and made demands like I lived under their thumb. It was more than pettiness. I could feel it. I asked around. Earl, one of my longtime ranch hands, tipped me off. Said he heard talk at the feed store. That new HOA lady Brenda, he said, spitting tobacco into the dust, she's been telling folks her 5-year plan involves beautifying the western approach to their estate. I didn't need a map. Their western approach was my land. Brenda didn't want better views. She wanted the barn. That lit something in me. Slow and hot. I tried diplomacy. I really did. She invited me to their little clubhouse for a friendly discussion. I went. Thought we could talk like neighbors. But the moment she opened her mouth, I knew. Mr. Morgan, she said, smiling like a shark, we just want to ensure Whispering Pines maintains its premier residential experience. Surely you understand that your rustic operations detract a bit from that. Rustic. My family's legacy boiled down to a nuisance. I stood there, staring at her smug face while her board nodded like bobbleheads. That's when it hit me. The gloves were off. She wanted war. And I don't mind saying she picked the wrong rancher. This HOA had declared war. And if it was war they wanted, well, I was an agricultural engineer. I knew how to cultivate a plant, tend it with care, and bring it to harvest. That rustic operations jab from Brenda didn't just sting, it echoed. It revealed how little she understood, or maybe how deliberately she chose to misunderstand, what my ranch truly was. This wasn't some weekend hobby farm. It was a working enterprise, a legacy, and the backbone of several families' livelihoods. My first move was a call to Tom Chalmers, a seasoned country lawyer who'd been untangling land disputes longer than I'd been alive. Tom listened quietly, rocking in his leather chair while I laid out the escalating barrage from Brenda and her board. When I was done, he gave a half smile. Son, he said, on paper they don't have a legal leg to stand on. Your property's never been part of their HOA. Their rules mean as much to you as the laws of a Tiddlywinks club in Timbuktu. It was reassuring. But then he tapped a pen against his desk and leaned forward. That doesn't mean they can't make your life hell. Nuisance suits. County complaints. People like this Brenda thrive on control. They stir up drama and hope you fold under the pressure. You need to document everything. Build a file. A thick one. So that's what I did. I became a meticulous archivist of Brenda Culper's campaign. Every letter, every veiled threat, every petty accusation went into the file. But simply collecting evidence felt too passive. I needed to understand what I was really up against. And that's where my training kicked in. I knew systems. And an HOA, for all its dysfunction, was still a system. I got my hands on their governing documents, the CCRs and bylaws, and began reading. It was a bizarre mix of legal jargon and obsessively specific restrictions. Paint colors, mailbox shapes, approved hedge species. Every inch of life micromanaged. And Brenda had positioned herself as queen over it all. Next came the financials. HOAs can be tricky, private entities, murky records, but sometimes cracks show. I spent long afternoons at the county records office, combing through tax filings and easement maps. I called in a favor from a cousin of mine, a forensic accountant, who pointed me toward red flags, unusual fund transfers, discretionary spending patterns. Nothing definitive yet, but there were hints. Their beautification fund was bloated, and Brenda controlled too much of it. Then I turned my attention to the board itself. Most were retirees, docile or detached. But a couple, Brenda's loyalists, seemed deeply invested in Whispering Pines' manufactured prestige. One man, Arthur Jenkins, stood out. Quiet. Uneasy. In the meeting minutes, documents I'd obtained through a resident I'd quietly befriended, Arthur's name kept appearing beside dissenting votes. That resident, Mrs. Gable, was a godsend. A widowed retiree who'd once believed in the dream of HOA living but had grown wary under Brenda's iron grip and ballooning fees. She kept me informed. Sometimes she'd call late at night, whispering updates about secret votes, under-the-table rule changes, or a new scheme Brenda was pushing. But the real turning point came from property records. I began tracing every deed, every plat, every sliver of land in and around Whispering Pines. My grandfather had been obsessive about boundaries. I still had his old maps, hand-drawn and annotated. I cross-referenced them with county records, spent hours buried in old surveys. Then I found it, something odd. Something buried. Apex Holdings LLC. The original developer of Whispering Pines. After selling off most of the lots, they had run into financial trouble. But they still held title to several key parcels. The clubhouse, the park, and a narrow, undeveloped strip of land running right along my eastern fence line. On an older development plan, that strip had been marked as a future access easement. Even more important, Apex still retained the declarant rights for the HOA. Declarant rights are powerful. They allow the original developer to appoint or remove board members, veto changes, and even alter the CCRs in some cases. And Apex Holdings, according to the latest filings, was barely solvent. Behind on taxes. Holding on to crumbling authority, and land they probably couldn't afford to keep. While I worked through all of this, Brenda kept hammering away. There were complaints about tractor dust. Then one about noise pollution from my cattle. Mooing, apparently, was unacceptable in her residential paradise. She even got the county involved, filing a complaint with a zoning officer. Unfortunately for her, that officer, Henderson, was a local. He paid me a visit, listened to the HOA's grievance, then walked my fence line with me. After taking it all in, he turned to Brenda's bulldog of a representative and said, in the most diplomatic tone I've ever heard, "Mr. Morgan's ranch predates your development by nearly a century. He's fully compliant with agricultural zoning. I suggest your HOA find a way to peacefully coexist." It was a small win, but a sweet one. And Brenda didn't take it well. Suddenly, their fence line sprouted, "No trespassing" signs every 10 feet facing my land, as if my cows were planning a raid on their petunias. Petty. Infuriating. But all it did was fuel my next idea. Because now, armed with documents, maps, and a growing understanding of the HOA's shaky foundation, a bold new thought began to take shape. What if I didn't just defend my land? What if I took the fight to them? What if I could use their own rules, their own structure, to flip the game? The idea was wild. Audacious. But as I pored over those maps and legal filings, it began to feel not only possible, but inevitable. The tipping point, the moment my simmering frustration crystallized into cold, deliberate resolve, came in a thick, official-looking envelope. It bore the Whispering Pines Estate's insignia like a badge of authority, stuffed with several pages of pseudo-legal bluster. Nestled inside was the demand. Not a request. Not a proposal. A formal, non-negotiable command. They wanted me to cease all commercial ranching operations within 500 feet of their property line. But that wasn't the real insult. They also demanded that I relinquish a 20-acre strip of my eastern pasture, land that had been in my family for generations, so they could transform it into a community green space and recreational zone. They even included a laughably small compensation offer, likely less than the value of the fencing alone. It wasn't a proposal. It was an eviction notice, issued by an entity with no legal claim to my land. My hands were shaking. I remember the moment I read it. My hands were shaking. Not with fear but with fury. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was an attempted land grab wrapped in the thin veil of community beautification. Brenda Culper had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I walked out to the eastern pasture, that land. My cattle moved lazily under a setting sun, unaware that their grazing ground had just been targeted by suburban ambition. The hills turned gold, shadows stretching like history itself. This wasn't just land. This was bloodline. Memory. Survival. The thought of handing any of it over to Brenda and her band of clipboard tyrants filled me with a righteous fire I hadn't felt in years. That night I didn't sleep. I unrolled the plat maps across the big oak table in my office. Pulled out deeds, Apex Holdings research, whispered updates from Mrs. Gable, Tom Chalmers' legal notes. They formed a chaotic mosaic. The pieces were all there. In the caffeine-soaked hours before dawn, a plan emerged, bold, complex, expensive. But the alternative, surrender or years of legal trench warfare, was unacceptable. The linchpin was Apex Holdings LLC, the original developer of Whispering Pines. I discovered they were in financial trouble, still holding several key parcels within the neighborhood, including the undeveloped buffer strip, and most critically the declarant rights. Those rights were powerful. They allowed the original developer, or a successor, to override the HOA board in many cases. Appoint members, amend bylaws, control decisions about common areas. In short, if I could purchase those rights, I wouldn't just fight back, I'd take the high ground. My cousin, the forensic accountant, dug deeper. Apex was in worse shape than I'd thought. Their real estate holdings in Whispering Pines were minor to them, forgotten footnotes on a collapsing balance sheet. But to me they were gold. The next step, contact. The proposal. Tom suggested we approach discreetly. If Brenda caught wind of what I was planning, she might try to meddle, or worse, rally her residents for a counteroffer. But it was unlikely they had the liquidity for that kind of play without a special assessment. And nothing angers HOA residents like surprise costs. We used a third-party intermediary, a land acquisition specialist known to Tom. Through lawyers and back channels, we drafted a proposal to purchase all of Apex's remaining property within and around Whispering Pines, including the declarant rights. The offer was modest, based on Apex's desperation, but fair. Negotiations were careful and quiet. Meanwhile, Brenda was ramping up her offensive. She'd enlisted a small-time local reporter looking to stir up drama. A hit piece soon ran in the town's weekly paper, framing me as a backward, uncooperative landowner standing in the way of progress. Quotes from Brenda gushed about community harmony and aesthetic excellence. I was painted as the last relic of a bygone era. Friends and distant cousins called, worried. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. Any public comment would just feed Brenda's machine. I had to stay focused. Mrs. Gable's warning. Then came a late-night call from Mrs. Gable. "Mr. Morgan," she whispered, voice trembling, "Brenda's planning something big. A community action strategy session. She's got pamphlets printed. Says she's ready to file a major lawsuit if you don't comply. She's calling it a turning point." It was exactly what I needed, a deadline. Brenda thought she was preparing checkmate. But I was already moving the king. The deal with Apex closed just days before the meeting. It wasn't cheap. I had to dip into savings meant for upgrades to the irrigation system. But it was worth every cent. I now owned several key parcels within Whispering Pines, including the very strip of land Brenda had tried to take by force of arrogance. More importantly, I was now the successor declarant. Community action strategy session. And Brenda? She had no clue. She was too busy preparing her big show. Tom advised I deliver the news in person. Bring the paperwork. Let the facts speak for you. So on that Tuesday evening, I put on a clean shirt, dusted off my boots, and gathered the folder, full of signed deeds, county filings, and legal proof of authority. I didn't park at the edge of Whispering Pines. I drove straight in, pulling into a guest spot near the clubhouse. Eyes followed me as I stepped out. I was the villain in Brenda's fantasy. The final boss in her HOA fairy tale. The clubhouse was buzzing. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Brenda had set the stage, literally. Anemic cookies, bad coffee, and stacks of pamphlets titled Reclaiming Our Community, a plan for action regarding the barn nuisance. Brenda stood at the front like a suburban empress, draped in a power blue pantsuit. Her board flanked her like royal attendants. She spotted me. Her face flickered, surprise then smug satisfaction. She thought I'd come to yield. I didn't say a word. I sat in the back, my thick folder on my lap, and waited for her to speak. And when she did, when she finally made her grand announcement, I'd be ready to rise. Not as a victim, but as the one holding the keys to her kingdom. She launched into it like a seasoned politician. With theatrical concern, she described the residents of Whispering Pines as victims, besieged by my inconsiderate and outdated agricultural practices. She spoke of children coughing in dusty yards, of peaceful evenings ruined by the low rumble of distant tractors. To her, the natural rhythms of a working ranch were nothing but noise and disruption. Then came the big reveal. With a practiced flourish, Brenda unveiled a glossy architectural rendering. A park built not just near but on my eastern pasture. A manicured green expanse complete with walking trails, a gazebo, and a playground. This, she said, her voice clear and commanding, is our vision for the future. A shared space. A gift to our community. And we are initiating legal proceedings to make this vision a reality if Mr. Klaus Morgan does not see reason and accept our generous offer. Applause followed, scattered and uneven. Her loyalists clapped. Others sat stiff, unsure. Some just stared. She then laid out the so-called community action plan. Petitions to the county commissioners, media outreach, and, if necessary, a well-funded lawsuit based on eminent domain. That last part was laughable. But I didn't laugh. I stood up. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Brenda looked up, surprised. Then, as if reclaiming the narrative, she offered a thin smile. "Mr. Morgan," she said sweetly, "perhaps you've come to your senses and are ready to negotiate." "Actually, Miss Culper," I replied, calm and steady, "I'm here to share a few recent developments of my own." I walked to the front, placed my thick folder of documents beside her glossy rendering. As of 3 days ago, through a legally formed entity, I completed the purchase of all remaining assets of Apex Holdings LLC related to Whispering Pines Estates. A ripple moved through the crowd. This includes the parcel of land along my eastern fence line, the very strip shown in your park design. It also includes the land this clubhouse stands on, the community park, and several other undeveloped parcels. Brenda's color drained. And most significantly, I continued, opening the folder to the stamped document, this acquisition includes the full and legal assignment of the declarant rights for Whispering Pines. I placed the paper down in front of her. "Which means," I said, looking her in the eye, "that I am now the declarant." The silence was absolute. Brenda stared at the paper as if it might change what it said. One of her board members sputtered, "That's not possible." "Oh, it's possible," I said, tapping the documents. "And it's perfectly legal." My attorney, Tom Chalmers, ensured everything was airtight. The mention of Tom's name silenced even the skeptics. In our county, his reputation for land law was ironclad. Brenda finally spoke, her voice cracked. "What does this mean?" "It means," I said clearly, "your community action plan is now moot. You can't sue to seize land for a park when the land is owned by the entity that also holds authority over your HOA's decisions regarding common property." I pulled out the CCRs. Under Article X, Section 3, I now have the right to veto any proposed changes to common areas. And under Article 12, I have the right to appoint the majority of your board members as terms expire. I held up one of her pamphlets. "This nuisance campaign ends now. The harassment stops. Today." The resolution. There were murmurs, stunned faces, dawning comprehension. Some residents looked relieved. Mrs. Gable in the back smiled openly. My goal, I continued, is not to rule by fear. My family has worked this land for generations. We value good neighbors. We believe in mutual respect. I turned to Brenda. But this? I gestured to her drawing, then to the window beyond it, where my pasture stretched out beneath the evening sky. This land you tried to take? It will be used, not for your gazebo but for grazing. 4 ranch operations. It will even include a new access route to my equipment barn, ironically reducing the dust on the main road. I paused, letting it all settle in. In effect, Whispering Pines, at least parts of it, are now part of the Barm Ranch. The room was dead quiet. Then someone chuckled. Another coughed. A slow, surreal realization was setting in. The rancher hadn't just won. He'd bought the battlefield. Brenda didn't take it well. For a moment I thought she might throw something. Her face turned blotchy red. You can't do this, she shouted. This is our community. These are our homes. We have rights. You do, I said steady. As homeowners your rights remain intact. And I intend to respect them. But the HOA, the body that tried to force me off my land, overstepped. I now have the legal authority to bring it back in line. One of her board members was practically hyperventilating. Another mumbled something about a lawsuit, but the fight was draining from the room. The residents weren't rallying to her side. Brenda tried one last pitch. He's trying to destroy Whispering Pines. But the panic in her voice betrayed her. The weight of legal reality, those stamped deeds and rights, had pulled the floor out from beneath her. The meeting ended in disarray. Some people fled. Others lingered, quiet and wide-eyed. Mrs. Gable approached me. Thank you, she said softly. You have no idea what it's been like. Several others nodded as they passed. It turned out Brenda's grip had long been tighter than most were comfortable admitting. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. Brenda hired a city lawyer. He sent a handful of aggressive letters, quoting irrelevant laws and threatening lawsuits. Tom dismantled each one with clinical precision. The threats evaporated. Brenda's support crumbled. Her loyal board members resigned, some citing health, others claiming to want more time with grandkids. Within months, the board was made up of more reasonable residents. Their focus turned to real community needs, not Brenda's power fantasies. She became a ghost in her own fiefdom. No more speeches. No more demands. And then one day a for sale sign appeared in front of her house. I didn't buy it. The idea amused me briefly, but I had all the land I needed. The HOA didn't disappear overnight. But it changed. The prescriptive rules were quietly rewritten. The focus shifted from aesthetics to safety and upkeep. Lawn police were replaced by common sense. Beige conformity faded. Color crept back in. Individuality returned. The buffer strip was cleared and fenced. My cattle now grazed where Brenda had envisioned flower beds. The access road reduced dust and traffic as predicted. Irony has a strange way of fertilizing the land. Some residents were cautious at first, unsure of what kind of ruler I might be. But I invited them out, right onto the newly cleared pasture, for an informal Q&A. No clubhouse. Just sky, land, and straight answers. I spoke of balance, of ranching and residential life coexisting, of shared stewardship of this valley. People listened, and something like trust began to grow. Brenda left not long after. Her house sold quietly. Rumor had it she moved out of state, maybe to start again. Hopefully not to try the same tricks elsewhere. As for me, I got back to the work I loved. Ranching, planning, living with the land instead of against it. The legal fees had been high, the stress higher. But I'd done what had to be done. I hadn't just defended the ranch. I'd expanded it, secured it, transformed a threat into an opportunity. People started calling it the story of the rancher who bought the HOA. It had a ring to it, maybe even a lesson or two. Know your rights. Trust your research. Never underestimate the power of legacy. And when someone tries to push you off your land, sometimes the best move isn't just to stand your ground. Sometimes you buy theirs. Was it extreme? Maybe. But in this case, it was the perfect and perfectly legal end to Brenda Culper's reign. Let me know what you think. And if you enjoyed this tale from the barn, stick around. There's more where that came from.